Hello and welcome for all of you who are watching. You're tuned into TMH and this is our daily English news. Our headlines for today: the Tigray president says that the Ethiopian forces have not disengaged from the battlefronts in the lines of the Pretoria Agreement. Reports emerge that Eritrean forces have massacred over 3,000 civilians, including older men and women, in the areas of Mariam Shawito near Adwa, Tigray. And Abiy and Blinken have discussed the urgent need for withdrawal of the Eritrean forces immediately. As we move on to our main updates for today, the Tigray president has said that they have not fully disengaged from the battle front lines. President Debretsion told Tigray State Council last week the Ethiopian forces have not disengaged from battle fronts in 7 weeks after the signing of the Pretoria Agreement. The president said his government is committed and willing to continue to commit itself to the full implementation of the agreement, and he also added, noting that Eritrean forces and the Amhara forces are committing heinous crimes on the people of Tigray, and called on the Ethiopian government to withdraw their forces as per the agreement. Eritrean forces and forces from the Amhara continue to commit heinous crimes and loot properties as the rights of our people remain violated and IDPs have yet to return to their homes, he added. President Debretsion noted that the AU monitoring team has not arrived in the Tigray region and that their arrival is still much expected for the smooth implementation of such peace deal. Speaking about humanitarian aid, the president says that more than 76,000 metric tons of food items were able to reach Tigray, while stressing the need to increase the delivery of humanitarian assistance so that the feeding of 6.5 million people in need is able to be done. Not only have Eritrean forces been left in Tigray and continue to commit massacres at large scale in areas they still control, now sources are reporting that the latest massacre in Mariam Shawito near Adwa, Tigray, in which about 3,000 civilians, including older men and women, have been massacred by Eritrean forces. Tighat reported that Birhana Gayum and Zero Gayum brothers are among the civilian victims murdered by the Eritrean soldiers in front of their families. The family members of Birhana and Zero buried the bodies in the backyard of their house in hiding from the brutal Eritrean soldiers after just a few days. The sources indicated that all family members in the area were not allowed to bury the bodies or mourn the loved ones for days, as they watched hyenas and vultures eat many of the bodies of these victims. Tigray Update also reported that yesterday a 15-year-old girl was raped and later shot dead by Eritrean forces in the area of Shira and Desalase, and the source added forces from Eritrea are still roaming around in Shira, looting, beating, and arresting civilians, removing them from their home as well. Moving on to our next update, the Global Society of Tigray Scholars is alarmed and outraged by the call from the Ethiopian government to terminate the mandate of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. GSTS appealed to the EU Council, UN Human Rights Council members, and the international community at large to categorically reject this outrageous demand. In related news, UN diplomats also told Human Rights Watch that the Ethiopian government, in an effort to undermine accountability for alleged war crimes and possible crimes against humanity, is once again seeking support to defund this commission. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed the urgent need for withdrawal of Eritrean forces. In the first ever in-person meeting held between Ahmed and Blinken, the two discussed the urgent need for all Eritrean forces to leave Ethiopia. The U.S. also urged access to the conflict areas by the international human rights monitors, as the State Department alluded to, and the discussions that took place on Tuesday took place in Washington, D.C. on the sides of the ongoing U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, and Secretary Blinken's call for accelerated implementation of the peace accord, which includes the withdrawal of Eritrean forces, comes as the deadline set for the disarmament of the Tigrayan combatants came to pass on the 2nd of December, on 30 days from the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, as well as the persistent concerns from Eritrean forces to continue massacres of civilians in Tigray and Ethiopia despite the peace agreement. On the 5th of December, General Taddesse Warada, who's the commander of Tigray forces, said that despite the presence of security challenges due to the continued presence of Eritrean forces, the neighboring Amhara region, nearly 65% of Tigray's armed combatants were disengaged from front lines as part of the efforts to implement this peace accord. The Ethiopian government, on its part, claims that in coordination with the international development partners, it was facilitating unfettered humanitarian supplies to Tigray region in 3 corridors through Gondar, Kombolcha corridors, and the Amhara regional state, as well as the Samara corridor in Afar regional state. The Abiy-Blinken meeting readout, however, failed to mention the concurrent withdrawal of the non-ENDF forces from Tigray, and the other conditions stated in the agreement is linked to the heavy weapons and the disarmament by Tigrayan combatants. Similarly, Secretary Blinken calls for the international human rights monitors to access conflict areas and comes in the backdrop of the Ethiopian government's opposition to allow access to international rights and experts to conduct independent investigations into all of the atrocities that have been committed in this ongoing war. As we move on to our final update for today, Ethiopia has obtained a phone hacking tech system from Israeli firm Celebrite. The Ethiopian police, responsible for mass detentions of minorities and persecution of opposition forces, as well as journalists, have purchased technology from the Israeli digital intelligence company to hack into the cell phones of detainees. As many other representatives and regimes, the Ethiopian Federal Police have been using Celebrite's technology at the height of civil war and caused tens of thousands of casualties and the prosecution of what it labeled unauthorized news outlets. According to Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the Ethiopian Federal Police have been using Celebrite systems since 2021 at the height of the civil war between the Ethiopian forces and their allies against the Tigrayan forces. The flagship product of Celebrite, a public company traded on NASDAQ, is a technology called UFED, which is used by authorities to hack into a seized phone, which are password protected, thus in turn around Celebrite's clients to download all information stored on those devices, including media files, text messages, call histories, contacts, and much more. In a letter sent by Israeli human rights lawyer Itai Mack to Israel's defense ministry, Celebrite, a number of human rights activists, called for the cessation of hostilities and the sales of the technology to support services to Ethiopia's repressive regime. The letter follows a harsh report by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch that detailed how Ethiopia has committed crimes against humanity and war crimes during the last round of fighting. And the reports state that since November 2020, security and civilian forces have been responsible for extrajudicial killings, rapes, and other acts of sexual violence, as the widespread pillage of crops and livestock and the looting of occupation of Tigrayan homes, destroyed sources of livelihood, and many more. Tigrayans have faced mass arrests, prolonged arbitrary detentions, and formal and informal detention sites where detainees were killed, tortured, and even ill-treated. Ethiopia's federal police, which is under the direct aegis of the Prime Minister's office, posted on its Facebook page that it had purchased UFED systems and equipment for its Crime Investigation Bureau, accompanying photos showing police officials exhibiting new Celebrite system taking out of the box. According to Mack, the Crime Investigation Bureau serves Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to persecute minorities, opponents of the regime, and journalists. Ahmed has taken advantage of the civil war against the Tigray minority to declare a state of emergency in the country and arrest tens of thousands of people. The detainees are held for long periods without trial, are severely tortured, and some are even murdered. In June of 2021, mainly in Addis Ababa, security forces, especially the federal forces, began searching homes, arresting and disappearing civilians based on their ethnicity alone of Tigrayan ethnicity. Mack wrote in a letter to the Defense Ministry Celebrate, since the beginning of the civil war on the 63rd of journalists have been arrested, and most of them in Tigray. In August, the federal police indicated that 111 unauthorized digital media outlets claiming incitement to violence, hate-mongering, harming the government, and over the past year, a number of independent media outlets have had to seize the operation to persecution by Abiy Ahmed's regime. The repercussions of the hacking of mobile phones in Ethiopia could be an abduction of blackmail, torture, extrajudicial killings, disappearances, and the deprivation of rights without the process of the citizen who owns these phones as well as their friends and relatives. Celebrite didn't deny that it sold its products to Ethiopia. The company said in a statement that it is committed its mission of creating a safer world by giving solutions to law enforcement bodies in strictly legal and ethical use of its products. To this end, we have developed strengthened means of monitoring that will ensure proper use of our technology and the framework of investigations that have been carried out completely legally. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.